Lovely. Thank you so much. And welcome, everybody. As you just saw, we're recording this session. We also have enabled the live transcript for closed captioning, and you may find that option on the control bar that usually appears at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're extending the warmest welcome to the first ASLE Spotlight of 2023 on the topic of community and collaboration. So hi, I'm Petra. Petra Kuppers, she, her. I come to you from Anishinaabe territory in what is colonially known as Ypsilanti, Michigan, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan. I'm one of your co-hosts. Let me introduce you to my fellow co-host, George Handley, is professor of interdisciplinary humanities at Brigham Young University. He's the author of New World Poetics, Nature, and the Adamic Imagination of Whitman, Neruda, and Walcott, and the co-editor of Caribbean Literature and the Environment and Post-Colonial Ecologies. He's the co-author of Climate Change Skepticism, a transnational eco-critical analysis. George is currently co-president of ASLE and also serves on the city council where he lives. George, over to you.
Thank you, Petra. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for that introduction, and I'll introduce Petra to you. Petra Kuppers is a disability culture activist, a writer, a community performance artist, and a 2023 Guggenheim Fellow. She uses somatics, performance, and speculative writing to engage audiences toward more socially just and enjoyable futures. She teaches at the University of Michigan and is the author of Gut Botany, which won the 2022 ASLE Creative Book Award, and Eco Soma, Joy and Pain in Speculative Performance Encounters, which was featured on an episode of Spotlight entitled Public Engagement and Performance in 2022. Her new poetry collection, Diver Beneath the Street, True Crime Meets Eco Poetry at the Level of the Soil, I like that description, will appear with Wayne State University Press in early 2024. So for those joining an ASLE event for the first time, we extend a special welcome to you. We're so glad you've joined us today and invite you to help sustain and further our work by becoming an ASLE member if you are not already part of the association. I am hosting from Provo, Utah, which is the ancestral lands of the Timpanogos Utes, Paiutes, and Shoshone peoples. ASLE's leadership launched this series in 2021 to elevate the work of our members in creative writing, public engagement, and in other areas. And so we're very excited to continue to foster connections with new audiences through the spotlights that were sort of initially a response to the conditions of COVID. By way of logistical information, we ask that you remain on mute. We'll have time for questions later, and we'll ask you to use the chat to post your questions. Please keep the questions concise, since we only have a few minutes together. All right, I guess I'll turn it back to you, Petra, to introduce our first presenter. Or no, let's see, I'm doing the first presenter.
I think you're doing the first one,
yes,
yeah.
Okay, my apologies. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mildred King Choncho Barya, who is a North Carolina-based writer and poet of East African descent. She teaches and lectures globally and is currently Associate Professor of Creative Writing and World Literature at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. She's the author of 4 full-length poetry collections, most recently The Animals of My Earth School, which was released by Terrapin Books 2023, which will be the focus of our spotlight today. Her prose, hybrids, and poems have appeared in Shenandoah, Joyland, the Cincinnati Review, Tin House, New England Review, and elsewhere. She's now working on a collection of creative nonfiction, and her essay, Being Here in This Body, won the 2020 Linda Flowers Literary Award and was published in the North Carolina Literary Review. She serves on the boards of African Writers Trust, Story Parlor, and coordinates the Poetrio, maybe Mildred can tell me how that's pronounced, reading events at Malaprop's Independent Bookstore Cafe. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Mildred, who will give us a brief presentation.
Thank you so much, George, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, the team at ASLE, for organizing this event. And I'm really delighted that we are here to have this conversation about community and collaboration. So to sum up the book, what my book works with, I thought I would share one poem that in a very basic and simple way sums up what community means to me. And then I will say a few words after that. And this poem comes from the Insecta section, and I'll talk about the structure of the book later. And it's called The World is Necessary, Even for Little Ants. Digging mounds between a grove of pine, carrying piles of food larger than themselves, stocking up for winter. Do humans have the means to live differently? When my phone vibrates, a shot of long lines at food banks, not unlike the ones before me, is followed by my lover's text. Would you believe thousands of hungry civilians waiting for hours? My God, hard times. Nation crumbles at my feet, jaws open. Lord, grant us mercy, even if in small doses. Let us feed, clothe, and house all in need. Let us not be known as the people who withhold compassion instead of serving the greater good. I want to see goodness for you, for me, for all of us living creatures. In my old country, ants will strip a forest bare. Whatever it takes, patience grows, hard work, hard times, tireless labors. Oh, how they travail, community-minded. Let us become aunts to one another. And this poem especially reminds me right now about how, you know, we still live in a world where we have some people choosing to go to war instead of solving their issues through other means that are more peaceful. So when I began writing this book, before it became a book, I had one question on my mind, and that was, how can we live in a manner that honors all life forms and acknowledges every person as a human being? And what happened is that the question helped me to clarify the issues or themes that I was working with rather than solving the problems. So I still have this question even in my current work. I thought the book will help me deal with that question, but I've realized it's probably going to be a question of my lifetime. And hopefully some of you too who are really interested about that, how, you know, we share this world and how to honor it and live in a way that respects every human being and every life form. I think that would be, you know, that's the ideal and something I think we are working towards. And so I had when I started writing the book, I didn't actually intentionally decide to write about animals. And that's the way I tend to work. I will just write, and then if I have 10 or 15 poems, I'll read through them, trying to revise and also to understand what it is I'm really doing, what I'm writing about. So I was pleasantly surprised when each poem had an animal in it. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm writing about animals. But what kind of animals? And that helped me form the structure. I realized that my animals fell into 4 kingdoms, which is the insecta deals with, you know, insects. And then there's the mammals section, then the birds section, and the reptile section. And so I had a poem about the spider, but I realized that I wasn't going to go into the kingdom of spiders. I just narrowed it down to the 4. And it helped to then think of new material that would fit into, you know, this loose structure. The insect sections, I was surprised by the kind of violence and sex and like the themes that emerged in that section, because I love listening to cicadas and I kind of considered insects as, these harmless creatures, other than mosquitoes that will sometimes bite you and give you pain. I hadn't expected violence in the insect section. And then surprisingly, when I was writing the reptile section, I was amazed by the kind of grace and compassion that shone through that section. And I was dealing with creatures that, I had considered quite aggressive before working with the poems. But what happened to conclude my brief introduction is that I realized that I wanted to listen to the animals rather than really writing about them from a human perspective, which is still hard to do because I'm still human. But it occurred to me to start to disappear from the project and imagine the human outside, viewing and listening to the animals from the periphery. And that also helped when I realized that I had a voice in choosing the cover. Then and this is the cover that I really love, because I did not want a human being to appear on the cover. And I looked at some previous books, not to criticize them, but to see how they were presenting the animals. And there was always like a human in the center and the animals around the human, which kind of shows that humans are in the center, we're the center of the world. And I did not want that. I wanted the human to be completely gone and see what it would be like to have the animals occupying center stage. So that's really what the book is about, trying to do that and trying to listen to the animals. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mildred. That's beautiful. And I love the cover, looks gorgeous. And I appreciate how space and time enter into that cover with the way that the graphics operate, the way that there is direction and verve in the image itself. So I think that sounds like it goes beautifully with the poetry. Thank you. And it's now time to hear from Ching-In Chen and Cassie Mira. Ching-In Chen is a genderqueer Chinese-American writer, community organizer, and teacher. They are author of The Heart's Traffic, Recombinant, 2018 Lambda Literary Award for Transgender Poetry, To Make Black Papers Sing, and Condiment for Kin, Information Retrieval for Monsters. Chen is co-editor of The Revolution Starts at Home, Confronting Intimate Violence Within Activist Communities, a core member of Massage Parlor Outreach Project, and a Kelsey Street Press collective member. They have received fellowships from Kundiman, Lambda, Watering Hole, Cancerat, Imagine in America, Jack Straw Cultural Center, and the Intercultural Leadership Institute, as well as the Judith A. Markowitz Award for Exceptional New LGBTQ Writers. They teach at the University of Washington Bothell and serve as writer-in-residence at Hugo House. And their collaborator is Cassie Mira. And Cassie Mira is an interdisciplinary artist based in Seattle, Washington. Her work analyzes transitional spaces by exploring human interaction through transitional experiences. Informed by research in LGBTQIA+ history and the development of modern computing, she investigates upheaval and adaptive responses of individuals and communities. And the two of them, Ching-In Chen and Cassie Mira, are now presenting on their exciting project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Petra and Amy and everyone else. We're so excited to be here. I'm Ching-In Chen.
And I'm Cassie Mira. Breathing in a Time of Disaster is a community-based writing, performance, and installation project exploring the unit of breath. It initially began as Ching-Yi's individual writing project in response to air quality injustice after flooding in Houston, Texas, during the Tax Day floods and Hurricane Harvey.
And two additional inspirations for the project are growing up with severe asthma, as well as commuting daily on the most dangerous highway in the United States, in dealing with that fear through meditation. I quickly realized, even though I was writing my own story, that I wanted to hear other breath stories.
We started organizing community story circles by inviting BIPOC, trans, and non-binary community leaders and artists to share their responses to disaster. We chose these communities because we belong to them and noticed that mainstream media representations of our experiences were inadequate.
So the idea of a story circle, which I learned from community-based theater, is telling a story in response to an open-ended question. And so two of the questions we used are tell a story about your relationship with the land and place where you live, tell a story about your relationship with your body and breath.
Everyone has the same amount of time, and we tell the storytellers the most important thing is to hold space and witness the other person's story. There's no talk back during storytelling, but often at the end, we take time to notice what common threads surfaced in listening.
And then we asked participants to make a creative response to that experience, and we showcased that as a one-day visual installation and one-nighted performance in Houston. You can see the flyer for it on the left-hand side.
Now, the photo of our first show was an image that I made of the blackened sky after a petroleum chemical storage facility along the Houston shipping channel caught fire and burned for 4 days. This event sparked a lot of community organizing, which also was an inspiration for our project.
So we moved to Seattle in 2019, and we did the story circle process with Seattle BIPOC, trans, and non-binary community members, and including a story circle for BIPOC students, which I did on my campus, University of Washington, Bothell. We then invited participants to make recordings of their breath and to make rituals in response to the phrase breathing in a time of disaster.
We also collaborated with climate sound artist Judy Twett, who mixed the breath recordings with industrial sounds. These were based on air quality data in community members' neighborhoods. We also recorded interviews with environmental justice leaders and scientists working on air quality issues. And the breath recordings, soundscapes, story circle excerpts, and rituals were displayed as a multimedia installation in Jack Straw Cultural Center's New Media Gallery.
And now we are working on creating a digital exhibit of this work. You can see the work in progress by going to the URL on the slide. We also have an open call for participation. Community members can contribute a breath recording and or ritual to be considered for inclusion in the digital exhibit. So it looks like we have about a minute left. So we want to play you one of the breath soundtracks for Lake City in Seattle. Okay, I think I see it. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I had the pleasure last week to lead a community writing circle with your website and the material on there. And there is a wonderful breath meditation by one of your participants in there that I would love to draw people's attention to. So go into that website and check out what's on there. And we got so chilled out and then really got thinking about our own breaths and the the toxic loads in our environment through that particular meditation. Thank you, too.
Yeah, thank you. That was very interesting. And I live in a place with inversions where asthma and other kinds of pulmonary problems are very common. And it's fascinating to listen to the human breath with the breath of bus brakes in the background. Next, we'll hear from Ursula Heise. Chi Pom, who's a partner in this project, was unable to join us in person, but Ursula is the Marcia H. Howard Term Chair in Literary Studies at UCLA. And she is a former president of ASLE, and in 2019 was awarded an honorary membership during her keynote address at the biennial conference. Her books include Sense of Place and Sense of Planet, the Environmental Imagination of the Global, and Imagining Extinction, the Cultural Meanings of Endangered Species. And Chi Pom is a tenured researcher at the Institute of Literature Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences in Hanoi. Her books include Literature and Nation Building in Vietnam, The Invisibilization of the Indians and Revenge of Gaia, Contemporary Vietnamese Eco-Fiction, co-authored with Chitra Sankaran. Sankaran and Pom were awarded an ASLE translation grant in 2019 to support work on their volume. So I'll turn it over to Ursula. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, George. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you. This is a collection of essays that emerged from, on one hand, growing interest in environmental humanities over the last decade in Vietnam, and the realization that, of course, different areas of the world are differently studied in eco-criticism. Southeast Asia in general, and Vietnam in particular, have received very little attention, at least in English. So Vietnam is a wonderful subject of study for environmental narrative, has very varied ecosystems from the urban areas of Hanoi in the south and Ho Chi Minh City, aka Saigon, in the south, the wetlands of the Mekong Delta here in purple in the very south of the country, the very mountainous central highlands, and an enormous 2,000-mile coastline. Much of the country is at or in the Mekong Delta already slightly below sea level. So the climate risks for the future are also very present in the politics and culture of current day Vietnam. Vietnam also has an enormously varied and interesting environmental history. I'll just name here the impact of French colonialism and its water management projects from the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s, the period of the Vietnam War, which is called the American War, with its various environmental impacts, the communist government since 1975, and its transition to a market-oriented socialist economy since the 1980s, a process that's called Doi Moi in Vietnamese. So you have influences of different types of colonialism. You also have conflicts running through the entire history between the Kin majority and various ethnic minorities, as well as conflicts between different political ideologies that emerged before, during, and after the Vietnam War. The contributors to our volume include literary scholars, anthropologists, and scholars of art and art history, and they come from Vietnam, Thailand, France, and the US. I've put the table of contents on the slide for you. So we have an essay by a French anthropologist on the theoretical foundations of studying environmental issues and environmental storytelling from the outside perspective, and how we might and what mistakes have been made in that process, and how we might reflect the perspectives of local populations. Part 2 deals mainly with indigenous narratives about the environment, principally from the central Vietnamese highlands, but also one essay on Buddhist approaches to nature that are common in the ethnic majority. The part 3 is about the Vietnam War and its sedimentation in literature and art, as well as children's literature. Part 4 then deals a little bit more with the changes that occurred from the 1980s onward, and contemporary experiences of nature in Vietnam. That reflect how how the changes in the economic structure of the country have influenced how its environment presents itself. And the last part is on environmental literature in Vietnam, in some ways cutting across some of the periods that appear in the earlier sections. So this includes essays from environmental travel narratives in an early 20th century magazine that was influential for sort of Vietnamese modernism, all the way to contemporary urban fiction and eco-fiction. So the genres that are included in the collection include art exhibits, nonfiction narrative, fictional narrative of various kinds, anthropological discourses, as well as film in a variety of these essays. And I simply want to conclude by highlighting the film that provides the background for my PowerPoint, and that is discussed briefly at the end of the introduction. NORC 2030, NORC meaning both water and country, is a climate sci-fi film from 2014 that is very, very different from most climate fiction or climate film that you may have read in other traditions. A very quiet and non-disaster oriented film that nevertheless very incisively depicts the life of a poor young couple in Vietnam confronted with a completely changed and far more aquatic environment. So that's roughly the outline of this volume. My co-editor, Chi Palm, is currently on a flight from Hanoi to Busan and therefore could not join us. She sends her greetings and her apologies.
Thank you, Ursula. That's a really astounding range of disciplines and artistic media and critical perspectives. Love to, maybe in the Q&A, I'd love to hear more about how that process worked. But I'll turn it back over to Petra.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So our final person that we're going to hear from is Naomi Ortiz. I'm very glad to introduce Naomi. Naomi Ortiz is a poet, writer, and visual artist whose work explores the cultivation of care and connection within states of stress. They are disabled mestize living in the Arizona-US-Mexico borderlands. Their current focus is on climate action, self-care for activists, disability justice, and relationship with place. They are the author of Rituals for Climate Change, a Crip struggle for eco-justice, and Sustaining Spirit, Self-Care for Social Justice, and the contributor to many anthologies, including The Ending Hasn't Happened Yet and We Are Not Your Metaphor, a disability poetry anthology. I'm glad that we can celebrate your book. Over to you, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Petra, and thank you, everyone. I was jotting down notes furiously, like enjoying so many rich things to look up. My name is Naomi Ortiz. I'm joining you from Tucson, which is on the current and ancestral land of the Atam and the contemporary settlement of the Yome, the Pasquiyaki tribe of Arizona. This region is also part of the Sonoran Desert, and I honor the land, sky, and practices of listening. Reimagining our relationship with land and challenging who is an environmentalist in the Arizona US-Mexico borderlands is investigated in my new collection, Rituals for Climate Change. Through my writing, I wanted to explore several questions, and I like that many of us mentioned coming to our work from a place of questions. I think that's really beautiful and so important. The questions I was coming to my work with was, how can I confront my fear and terror of climate change? Can I have a relationship with the place? Can I have a relationship with this place if I don't live on my ancestral lands? As a disabled person of color, my needs, my body, and perspective don't have a home in conventional responses to climate change. What wisdom have I learned through disability that can contribute to environmental justice movements? This book became a way forward for me. I wrote myself back into having a deeper, more nuanced relationship with place. Collaboration is difficult. I write I feel like a lost soul wandering around the communities and discourses of environmental movements, shaking my jangly earrings, whispering hello into the wind. My ghostly presence, one they cannot quite make out. Yet, they use language in which I recognize my reflection. Mining scars cripple and deform the earth. People are blind to the cost. Pollution spreads like cancer. Disabled bodies are thrust like a dam to make people stop and pay attention. Using fear of my body and other disabled people's bodies as a metaphor for environmental destruction is just using fear to incite fear. I write about this disconnect with eco-justice movements, and when it comes to questions of equity and accessibility, there's a challenge that I offer in one of my poems that I will share with you. And this poem is titled Ode to Plastic Cups. The goal is for no trash to be sent to landfills, incinerators, or the ocean. Wikipedia, Zero Waste Definition 2020. Weight of both reusable glass plus liquid means my wrist twists down the only direction it bends, sends drink to splash on carpets or slippery floor. Worse yet, non-flexing elbow means arm smacks cup across room with accidental gusto at least once a week. Beloved coffee cups shatter into hundreds of pieces. Must dredge energy to clean up now. Hot beverages, my expensive habit. At restaurants, I have to ask for a straw. Slick, perspiring drink, pointless to even try to lift to lips with fingers, hand, shoulder. Instead, I bat and slide glass across tabletop, position straw below mouth, sip, and then push it back, nudge, shift. Except every once in a while I miscalculate, or glass bottom catches on table surface to topple and douse eating companion with cold beverage, saturate my clothes and shoes good. Unless the cup is plastic. Oh, chemically bonded vessel, with your springy forgiveness, to bounce passively on floor, patiently listless, you wait for me to retrieve you in my own time. Oh, plastic cup with your bright, shiny colors, your fun designs, your resilient sides. As scooter squeezes you between wheel and wall, you may bend, but do not crack where you lie. Weight light, large brim, I can sip straight from the rim. Glossy red party cups sold in long plastic bags last me month-long jags. I stock up, dollar store deals, just what works for my body. Call it an accommodation, this need for plastic cups. As disabled person, independence is precarious. Daily life and reason constructed upon a wobbly set of Crip hacks get me from can't to good enough. Where is my place in zero waste? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for this reading as well. I love this Crip hack poem and this really the immediacy of getting us to understand some of the contradiction and complexities that happen when actual human bodies encounter actual chemically bonded materials. I think it's a really beautiful piece. Crip hacks indeed. So thank you everybody for sticking beautifully to the time. We have time to talk and ask questions, and both George and I have prepared a question beforehand so that you could all have a look at it beforehand. And then I want to invite our audience to start thinking of questions too. So we're going to just each ask a question, and then hopefully we'll have another few minutes at the end for audience questions. Just put them in the chat and we'll read them out. So I'm going to start with this first question here. Dear people, some of you have already began to address this, but just giving you a bit more space to enlarge on this. How is your practice informed by the land? and by human and more than human inhabitants that surround you in your locality or in your research sites. Can you give a specific example of a surprise that emerged from sight and land? And whoever is interested in that can take it away.
This is Naomi. I'm happy to kick us off. Oh, were you gonna go, Mildred? No, okay. Sorry. This is always the funny part, like, okay, of Zoom. So for me, the desert has always been a place of sanctuary. I grew up here. And, you know, with the shifts that are happening with climate change, with things getting drier and hotter, I was just getting more and more resistant to spending time in this place that I love. I wanted to push away from it, which happens, I think a lot about disability and concepts of vulnerability. And I think when I feel vulnerable, I often want to push away and create distance between what is making me feel vulnerable. So it was a real question for me about how to have conversations with the land in order to learn how to be in relationship with it in this changing and evolving way. And when I say conversations with the land, I mean literal conversations with the land. I would go, and you know, as a disabled person, I can't go out in the middle of nowhere. I generally am limited to the places where there is access by vehicle or where I can get my wheelchair in. So, you know, those are these places of these sort of in-between spaces where there's other people often, but I would sit for long periods of time. And I found if you sit there long enough, there's usually gaps when people are not there, especially in the heat in the desert. But it was a really beautiful moment when I stopped sort of ranting and laying all of my fear down and really got to a place of listening and hearing what the land had to tell me. And I write about it in several essays within the book, these conversations I have with land. So I think one of the things that surprised me was after one of the conversations, a big fire had just happened that went through an entire mountain range. And Tucson is surrounded by several mountain ranges, and it went through an entire mountain range. And I was feeling so sad and really wanting to like put this sadness on the land. And the land told me no. So that was a really surprising and beautiful moment, and that I needed to believe in mending. And that's the energy I needed to be carrying with me to the land. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Naomi. Beautiful.
I'll complement that a little bit, because my experience of land throughout my life has really been that I've mostly been on land that I did not grow up on. So including Los Angeles, I was born and raised in Germany. So I came to the United States as a graduate student. And I'm a comparatist by training and by passion. So I've always been curious about other places than the one I inhabit. And so when you visit, you, on one hand, I mean, I think there's two sources of surprise. One is just the sort of pleasure and shock of encounter with a totally unfamiliar ecosystem, all the way from the soil to the trees to the birds. And then the other series of surprises that come once you go past the immediate sensory experience and actually find out how the place that you're encountering was shaped. So for me, that was particularly vivid in a bike tour that we took through the Mekong Delta south of Saigon in 2017, where I was very struck by the unusual landscape. And it's sort of an equally aquatic and terrestrial landscape, densely inhabited, intensely polluted, also intensely biodiverse, intensely agricultural. But then, so that was a source of constant surprises. But then finding out about the history, the very complex history about the conflicts between the Kin majority and ethnic minorities over the centuries in that area, as well as then the impact of French colonial water management that changed a lot of the water flows and changed the way in which the ecosystem works, was absolutely mind-blowing.
Thank you. That's fascinating. George, do you want to go in with, oh, sorry. Everybody has to go ahead.
This is Ching-In. I was just going to say that Cassie and I are also both didn't grow up in either Houston or Seattle. And I think that the story circle process brought us closer to a connection to those places and those lands. And especially it was listening to the variation in terms of people's connection to their environment and these places, which is something we were trying to get at in the project. Also one struggle that we had is that the data was connected to the zip codes, but the zip codes are, tied to colonial naming. And so that's something that we're still thinking about. We tried to address it in the installation by, also trying to include, the other ways that land was named, but we know that's an imperfect solution. And I would say that one of the big surprises I had in listening to feedback from the community participants, or how interested that they were in the other stories from the other places, not their own place. So that was a big surprise for us. And I think we're interested in trying to nurture more cross location exchange because of that.
Beautiful, thank you. Mildred?
Thank you. So when I was writing, I'll mention one poem about the cicadas. I love cicadas, especially this time of the year. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, which is not where I was born because I'm from Uganda. But one of the things I actually find about land is that for me, land is always more embracing and kinder to me. And I'm not saying that I've met a lot of unkindness from people, but like between humans and land, I always feel so comfortable in any landscape. While with humans, I have to navigate the connections and the relationships and maybe even trade a little bit more carefully. And I don't trample on land either, but I just feel that there's already a connection with land. And I don't know whether that comes from my own, culture, upbringing about us human beings being part of land. So I never see myself as separate from land. If anything, it's like I'm not just a part of, but I am land and land is me. It's that embodied experience. And so my writings about land or from land have really been mostly embodied rather than me being separate and observing or seeing land. It's like we merge, and that's part of the joy that I get. So this poem about the cicadas, I was just outside my house listening to the cicadas, and I was loving the music. And so I felt like, oh, I'm going to write a poem about joy, because the experience was really of joy. But then I had been reading a lot of literature about the pesticides that are going to make all the cicadas extinct. And all of a sudden there was this dip into the sadness. And then I started to listen to the silence. The cicadas were still singing, but I tried not to hear the song and hear the silence beneath the song. And I was shocked how sad I actually became, as if I was already, it wasn't just imagining a world without cicadas music, but it was almost like this will be so painful to bear, to try and go beyond the sound and hear the silence of creatures going extinct at our own hands. And so that surprised me, because I thought I was going to bless the world with joy, and I ended up, like, okay, we have to deal with all these emotions that emerge. And that's always often a surprise when I think I'm working with one major feeling and I end up, in this other territory of sadness, but also of appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you for these gorgeous and rich answers. I'm going to hand it over to George.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I've got more questions than I have time, but I'll just ask one that I think probably ties into this first question about the land and listening. I mean, I certainly heard a common theme in the presentations about listening, and hearing you each talk about connection to land in a more focused way brings that out even more to me. That's sort of maybe one of the fundamental substrates of work in environmental humanities. But this is also about collaboration, so I'm kind of interested to know about the human social element that is implicit or explicit in your projects. And I'm thinking kind of practically, methodologically. I alluded to this in Ursula's case, since that was an extensive collaborative project of multi-authors, but even for single-authored work, I'd like to hear you reflect on, what are the challenges and rewards of collaboration, of moving from that maybe more personal connection and the listening to producing something that builds bridges, that connects to other people. What are some of the nuts and bolts of that process for you in these different projects?
I can start with that because this collection really has been an adventure for me. I was asked to, Chipam was the one who initiated the project and asked me to be her co-editor. And I said, but I'm not a specialist on Vietnam. And it became clear through our conversations, both with her and with some of the contributors, that one of the obstacles in global collaboration among environmentalists and eco-critics that you hear a lot from colleagues in Latin America and Asia is that they read our work, but we don't read theirs. And in the case of East Asia, that has perfectly reasonable reasons, in the sense that there are dozens of different languages involved, and even you may read Chinese or Japanese, but that doesn't give you access to Korean or to Vietnamese. And so one of the complaints that I've heard over decades, really from colleagues and co-activists in other parts of the world, is that they want to be heard more. And so I saw my role in this collaboration as being sort of the one who could listen to what the specialists in the field brought to the conversation and try and shape it in such a way and translate it in such a way that it would be able to be heard and to be read by Anglophone audiences, not just, of course, in the United States, but also in Australia, Britain, other parts of Asia, and so forth. It was very challenging. Most collections are challenging in that it's very hard to make them coherent, and one always falls short on that. In this case, the additional challenges were that the contributors really came from very different academic backgrounds and had followed very different conventions of academic writing. So, French contributors would write in a sort of European, multiply subdivided form. Other people would just write in one continuous essay. So you had to sort of work with them to develop both the content and the form. And of course, there were enormous challenges. One anecdote I'll tell that took up part of my time during the pandemic was that I realized in some of the contributions from our Vietnamese colleagues that some of the stuff that they were translating into English from Vietnamese books were not working. They didn't make sense. And so I looked at these books and I realized, okay, so this is actually, for example, a Vietnamese translation of a French anthropological text from the 1930s that they're now translating into English. And that double translation, of course, always causes problems. So since the libraries were closed at that time, what I did was to go online, where we had online access to a lot of these sources, and try to find the original French texts, then do a keyword search for something that I thought was likely to be judging from the translation in the original French text, locate the original passages and retranslate them. But so this was like, you know, very, very time consuming, but kind of fun and kind of interesting, because a lot of these French anthropological texts that, you know, about ethnic minorities in Vietnam and their stewardship of the environment have been translated into Vietnamese, but they've not been translated into English ever. So it was just a really interesting sort of cross-linguistic, but also cross-generational form of collaboration.
I can jump in. I think, well, obviously a lot of our project is focused around collaboration, and I think that we've learned a lot from in each step, and I think when we began, it wasn't necessarily you know, doing this. Our goal wasn't to do the breath soundtracks, and our goal wasn't necessarily to showcase folks' rituals, and that actually surfaced in the first round in Houston, where we asked people to respond creatively to each other, and then a lot of people were making rituals, like these are rituals of how you survive, you know, and sharing them. And so that really informed when we came to Seattle. We wanted to highlight that and then actually make an explicit ask to folks to do that. Similarly, the Breath soundtrack, that was a collaboration with Judy Twett, and we were trying to figure out how can we sonify the you know, these differences, and Judy has a background in that, so that became a really, really great collaboration in you know, bringing us to the Breath soundtrack, which we, you know, hadn't initially thought of. I think that I guess the way we've handled a lot of the, you know, we had to change a lot of our project, including going virtual when I did the BIPOC student story circles, because of COVID. Is just having to have a lot of flexibility and ability to shift when we had to. But it, for me, I've learned a lot from when I first started the project. And one of the reasons I wanted to invite other folks to think alongside with me is because I had this inkling that, you know, I had this specific experience around breath, but I wanted to know what else was out there. One of the stories that really resonated with me is one that is from Seattle, and it's Ariane True, who's a writer based in Seattle. Told a story about working at the Seattle Public Library and having to hold their breath because of chemical sensitivity, and you know, the impact that had on them, and that was, you know, one of the stories that now I feel like I'm so glad I'm able to share with people.
This is Naomi. I do a lot of social justice organizing and collaboration locally and also with folks in other areas. And I'll just say two pragmatic things. One is a real practice and something I've actually started insisting within organizing spaces is to really practice respecting capacity, which means that we often go slower. But I think that people, I know in my life, people are not talking about the changes that are happening in our environments in a way where they're like touching it with their heart. But a conversation around what it means to respect our own capacity and what we can organize or consent to contribute it often turns into a really deep and beautiful practice that then leads to some hope openings, I think, with understanding that there are limits of capacity with this world that we live in.
Thank you. Mildred, do you want to make a comment? Go ahead.
I was going to avoid responding so that we have maybe room for one more question, because everything I could say has really been said, especially the emphasis of respect and listening, which are the values of collaboration, and knowing that you're entering a sort of communion. The collaboration isn't always, actually for me, the hard part of it doesn't always spring from conversations or awkwardness, but they have to do more with what's not spoken. And so how do we tap into the thing that we are not even languaging, the thing that has no words? It's like, what are some of the ways we can still learn from that when we don't have language as we know it?
Thank you. Yeah, beautiful. And indeed, we have a few more minutes. So, dear audience, this is the moment. Please, do you have a question for us, for these wonderful writers here? Just put it in the chat, and I will gladly read it out. And it's often very hard to come up with questions at the end of a Zoom. We do know that, which is why we always have questions someone, here you go. That's beautiful. It's a lovely question. It's from Aline Plevin. Okay, I'm going to go that one. Do you think when we meet the land, however, that is, it meets us? I'm going to read the second one out as well, and then either of you can respond to whatever you like there. Because many people, and this is from Alex Tischer, because many people seem to be working in a place they're not born in, going off of Mildred's comfortability. Has your sense of comfortability to your environment changed as you inhabit a different landscape? And how has that influenced your writing or scholarship? Two really exciting questions. So one about when we meet the land, does it meet us? And about comfortability and change. Take it away, people.
I think I'll jump into the comfortability and change quickly, and which in a way is actually connected to the earlier question of when we meet the land, does it always meet us? You know, my immediate response is that yes, maybe because the land is already embedded with wisdom, we have no idea, like we can never know, we can never fully exhaust. So when we meet the land from this perspective of wanting to learn from the land, that the land is a body of knowledge, not just land that we are to take for our own use, then it starts to give us this wisdom. And the way the wisdom comes out of the land is also in ways that we can actually understand. So we can't get all the wisdom at once. We get just what we are ready to listen to and what we can understand. So the land can teach us forever. It could take 1,000 years to even, learn some of the basic principles or laws, but I feel that it's always open to give us that land. This is just my perspective. It's always open, but human beings are the complicated part, and to understand people and have a conversation and work with them, then that requires extra. And so to get into the next question is that it's not, for me, when I'm in any new place, comfort isn't actually what I'm thinking about. Maybe because I like to work with discomfort too. It's like discomfort is telling me something about myself, either my resistances or things I need to navigate, or how to be more adaptable or how to fight, And again, I could go back to the turtles, not just from the symbolic perspective, but I like to observe a turtle and see when they're getting out their claws and like really getting ready to attack, and also when they retract. And it's like, do I know when I'm in situations when I need to retract and just be, or when I need to actually fight and engage? So there is that, and for me, I feel like it's the comfortability and how it changes my scholarship. It's more dynamic when the human beings are in question. When I'm wondering about where I am in like social justice issues right here in the United States, which are not the issues I was reckoning with in Uganda. And the hard part isn't really the land part. True, we still need to work on environmental justice, but I think the hard part is just trying to wrap my mind around the idea that some people refuse to see every human being as a human being. That's where the discomfort comes in. That's something that I could never be comfortable with. While the land here says you can live here, you can go into the woods, you know, you can do anything that is respectful. But with people who are not willing to see me as a human being, that's where the discomfort comes in, and where I still don't know how to deal with that, frankly, because I don't know how to bridge that conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for this amazing answer to these two beautiful questions. We are at 3:30, Amy, and people are beginning to give their thanks online to us. I think we're going to end it here. George, do you have a sense of that? Good.
Thank you, everyone. That was really wonderful. We appreciate your achievements. We're glad to celebrate and give them some attention today, and we appreciate the time that you took to prepare for this. And we're grateful to Amy for all of her work behind the scenes. This was really wonderful.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, audiences. Thank you, amazing participants. Thank you, Amy. It was lovely to do this, and we're looking forward to the next one. Bye, everybody.